I think everybody knows what it feels like to be discouraged when they are trying something new or trying a new thing. When we're kids, um, if we're trying out a new skill, we often discourage ourselves, or we get discouraged because we feel like we should be good at it right away. And other kids tend to also feel that we should be good at the thing we're trying right away too, and so might tease or discourage us instead of celebrating the little milestones of progression as we get better at the skill. And I still do this. I get it in my head that I can do something often because of other transferable skills, and then I get pissed off that I'm not immediately the best at the thing that I'm trying. I spent all of this week animating a 10-second clip with two characters in a 3D rendering program. And when I was done, I texted my brother and I was like, that took forever. It's almost like animation is hard and is a highly skilled profession. Uh, Apparently, just because I can draw, just because I can do 3D modeling and understand the basics of 2D animation does not mean I will understand why my character's head suddenly appeared backwards in the CGI render. Or here's something I used to do that I still feel crappy about now that I'm an adult. Someone would show up to school in a brand new style. Maybe they were the shy kid before who wore corduroy pants and that wolf sweater. Everyone had that wolf sweater, right? Or knew someone with that wolf sweater. They were that kid on Friday, and on Monday they show up to school full goth, and I would say, "Oh, what a poser." We know they aren't really goth. If I could go back in time, I would go visit me and I would say, shut up. Who cares? They're trying something new. Maybe they've always been goth on the inside and just found the courage to match it on the outside. It doesn't affect you. Get a life. But this is actually a real issue in faith communities. I've had to mediate more than one church conflict where people wouldn't let other people serve or didn't trust other people to serve in the church because they knew who that person was or what kind of person that person was growing up. And there's a lot of feelings that can be wrapped up in that. If the person in question was a bully when they were a kid, and now that they are an adult and trying to serve in a capacity in the church, the people who were bullied by them are going to feel upset by that, and that's valid. And so in those cases, real amends have to be made. Real amends have to be made before that person can continue to serve. But there have been other times where people were like, well, person X can't be on the worship team because they used to sleep around and smoke weed. And even before I had my now expansive sexual ethic, I was like, I don't care if they were doing that yesterday. If they want to turn their life around and they, if they want to turn their life around, I want to facilitate that happening. This is a community of grace. If I was made to wait until I was worthy of serving in the church before I was allowed to serve in the church, I would never have gotten there. The people who knew us before often have the hardest time accepting what God is doing in our lives right now. But God is doing a transformative work in your life. And just because the people who knew you when you had to pretend to be someone else can't see that, that doesn't make it any less miraculous. That just means those people don't understand what a miracle is. You have been often, especially if you were in the LGBTQ community, you have been conditioned to deny who you were or who you are for whatever reason. You couldn't be gay, you couldn't be trans, you couldn't be bi or ace or any number of things. And so you denied that part of yourself and lived as something you were not until you finally found the courage and the strength to live the way that God created you to be. And when you did that, somebody said, why do you have to make it your entire identity? Not realizing that being a cis straight person is just as much a part of that person's identity as being queer or genderqueer is to yours. They just don't see it because everything is for them. And you might get that on multiple fronts. Why do you have to make everything about race? Why do you have to make everything about your disability? I get it with autism all the time. People are constantly telling me that I'm more than just my autism. I shouldn't be so willing to label myself, but I don't see my autism as a deficit. I don't see my queerness as a deficit. But the way that society is structured makes my life more difficult because of those facets of my identity. So my labels help me advocate for myself and others like me. And there's actually a division over this in the LGBTQ community between the older generation and the younger generation. And as an elder millennial, I'm kind of right in between it because I existed on both sides. The Gen X and Boomer LGBTQ people had the term queer used against them as a slur. And if they were labeled as gay or as lesbian, it was dangerous. They could face physical peril for that label. So they do not like that we call ourselves queer and have a label for everything. And when I was growing up, queer started to be reclaimed by the LGBTQ community. Queer started to be reclaimed, and other words were used against me as a slur or as an insult. But what I have been part of many conversations with older LGBTQ people who say, don't you understand that we did everything we could to fight against labels, and now you guys are all just out here labeling yourselves with everything? And I'm like, no, baby, no. Like, you fought against oppression and inequality. That's what you were fighting against. You were fighting against oppression and inequality. The labels were used as a tool of that inequality and of that oppression. Now, the opposite is true. The labels, not having labels, gives people an excuse not to talk about the disparities in our societies. It gives them an excuse not to talk about it. And when you can't name the issue, you can't do anything about it. So we are all fighting for inclusion. A label is just a label. It's utilitarian. You were excluded because of your label. We are fighting for inclusion with ours. Same fight, different front. But how you live, and whatever label or non-label by which you choose to identify, this truth remains. Living authentically is a ministry. Living authentically is a ministry. Just like how every time somebody comes out, it makes it just a little bit easier for others to come out too. You living authentically into who God created you to be and into the transforming works that God is doing in your life, however wonderfully gay or trans or bi or poly or straight or cis, whatever that means, living that way is a ministry to others. SJ and I have been married for almost 15 years, 14 and a half years next month. And in that time, we've had a lot of people tell us that our marriage was a ministry to them, which was weird to me because that's not our intention. Our intention is not to have this thriving ministry of marriage. Our intention is not to be relationship goals to other people. Our intention is to stay married for one more day. Is just to make it through that day, because marriage is hard. And there are moments in every relationship where it's not clear that that relationship is going to survive. But that effort entails certain things. We agreed at the beginning of our relationship not to call each other names or use disparaging language towards or about each other, especially during a fight. We have a rule about if we do have to vent to somebody during the hard times, that we also have to say twice as many nice things over time, twice as many positive things over time to that same person. Because negative things stick in people's minds more than positive things. So even if you say an equal amount of negative and positive things about your relationship, that person is going to have a negative imprint about your relationship. And that imprint is going to affect what kind of advice they give you or how they talk about your relationship to others. And I'm not saying to sugarcoat anything or to like pave over abuse or anything like that, but just At the times that I need to vent or I'm frustrated, I also need to be cognizant and to tell that same person I'm venting to the nice things about our relationship. And it doesn't have to be that same day. It just has to be something that I come back to and say, oh, SJ is the best. They did this thing for me, and it made me feel so good. We try and serve each other and do nice things for each other. The two most asked questions in our marriage are, what are your hopes and dreams and stuff? And what can I do for you? And then if it's in our power, we do those things. And doing all this is still no guarantee that a marriage will survive, but it just that's the authenticity. It's just that authenticity of us trying to love each other and serve each other in order to still be married tomorrow, that is being seen by other people and they are being encouraged by it. You living as your authentic self, even if it's just trying to make it through another day, is a ministry to people with that same goal and those same struggles. Just because the people who knew you, who knew who you were when you had to pretend to be someone else, can't see it, doesn't mean that it's not. And if they try to invalidate you, you can take comfort in knowing that people did the same thing to Jesus. We're going to be reading from Mark chapter 6, verses 1 to 6. It said, he left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter's son, the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house. And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Sing Song Scribbler's asking me on TikTok if I took the Luke passage from the lectionary this week and switched it to Mark. Yes, because I like Mark better, which is an argument we've been having, her and I, on TikTok for the past several weeks about why Mark is the best gospel. Excuse me. The thing that stands out to me in this section is it says he could do no miracles there, except that he healed a bunch of sick people. Which leads me to ask, what miracles were they expecting? When I think of a Jesus miracle, and like, that's what I kind of think of. That's what I go to immediately. Jesus heals people. In the book of Luke, we have the same account, except Jesus also tells them off and basically says, just because you didn't experience the miracle doesn't mean the miracle didn't happen. It just means the miracle wasn't for you. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Jesus didn't say that in those exact words. It's my interpretation of what he said. But God is doing, I'm going to say this again, I've said it twice already, God is doing a transformative work in your life. And just because the people who knew you when you had to pretend to be someone else can't see it, doesn't make it any less miraculous. They just don't understand what a miracle is. It just means the miracle wasn't for them. And therein lies the rub, my friends. We see this a lot with white people suddenly being confronted with media not specifically tailored to them. When people are used to having everything be for them, when they see something that is not for them, they have a visceral reaction to it. When all you know is privilege, equality feels like oppression. Taking a white comic book character and recasting them as a different race in the TV or movie adaptation is not white erasure, because people in media are disproportionately white compared to the actual population of Canada and the United States. Taking a straight character and writing them as queer is not straight erasure, because cisgender heterosexuals are disproportionately represented in media compared to the actual population of the world. Just because something is not for you does not mean that you are oppressed, and it does not mean that the thing isn't very good and very meaningful, especially to the people it now represents and is for. Living as your true authentic self is an act of defiance. Refusing to adhere to pointless and often harmful social norms is an act of defiance. It is a work of liberation. Coming out normalizes queerness and transness and makes it easier for other people to do the same. It humanizes LGBTQ people in the eyes of people who know you and in the eyes of people who you meet. I talked about this on a podcast a little earlier in the year with Chris Wilson, or last year, I guess, at this point, a while back. Marginalized groups are nebulous concepts to people outside of those groups until they actually meet someone from those groups. And this manifests in some really interesting ways when doing community organizing and justice work. Queer spaces and BIPOC spaces are often need to be united for the same cause, to fight the same kind of oppression, because they're oppressed by the same institutions. And what I'm about to say in no way invalidates or discounts the existence of BIPOC queer people. But the mainstream voice of queer people is predominantly white, and the mainstream voice of the BIPOC community, especially in social justice and stuff like that, is predominantly straight, because a lot of that's done through the Black church. So if you talk to people who do community organizing, there is a tension when you bring those groups together, when you bring the Black church and the LGBTQ community together to fight for common cause, because often until that time, each of those communities was just a nebulous concept or even a caricature of who those people actually are. And bringing them together forces those groups to humanize each other in their own minds. So you coming out and living as your authentic self takes queerness from a nebulous caricature of a concept in the minds of the people you know, and it puts a human face to it. It humanizes it. And that is vastly, vastly important work. Because when you are able to live authentically into the transformation God is doing in your life, miracles happen. Queer youth become significantly less likely to unalive themselves when they see other people being able to live authentically as who they are. It becomes harder for people to make and pass anti-LGBTQ legislation. Life and love flourishes. And though there are people in your life who will disparage you and say that you've changed or call into question your authenticity, their inability to recognize your healing does not reduce in any way the significance of that miracle. Just like we now live in a Christian nation, essentially. It's not actually, and it never has been, but that's what people imagine. And so America is Jesus's hometown. And so the miracles he's doing in these other communities are unrecognizable to mainstream American Christianity. Doesn't make it any less of a miracle. It doesn't demote the healing in any actual way. I do want to say that you should not do anything that would make you unsafe, make it unsafe for you to exist. If coming out means that you lose your home or your job or your support in a way that puts your well-being at risk, do not do it. It does not make you any less queer or any less genderqueer not to be out of the closet. But if you can, doing so is an act of defiance against an oppressive system that wants to silence marginalized voices, and it gives other people the strength to stay the same. God is doing a transformative work in your life, and just because the people who knew you when you had to pretend to be someone else can't see it, that doesn't make it any less miraculous. It just means they don't understand what a miracle is.